Speaking of being quite careful with one's words, I think now, since it's come up a number of times, it's worth getting into Chuck Schumer's book a little bit more. Something that strikes me that you paid close attention to was his definition of anti-Semitism. And I notice that it's not only words like anti-Semite, but racist, sexist, homophobe. They are thrown about with utter abandon these days. And
Fascist.
yeah, and they're rarely defined. They're used as catch-all terms, and they're extremely damaging because once you hurl that term at someone, they're on the defensive, and it's very hard to defend yourself against a claim like that. That's so all-encompassing. So what I'd like to ask then, so relevant to what we're talking about right now, is how ought we to define anti-Semitism?
I don't think we should use the term. I don't use it. First of all, and I'm not being coy here, for several thousand years, there's been a debate among Jews about what's a Jew. So if you don't know what a Jew is, how could you know what an anti-Semite is? If anti-Semite means somebody who hates Jews. If you don't know what a Jew is, why use the term, how can you know what an anti-Semite is?
This is an ongoing debate among like rabbinical scholars, or?
No, it's an ongoing debate among Jews, whether, if you don't believe in the religion, are you Jewish? If you're conservative, is the Reform wing of Judaism Jewish? And if you're Orthodox, is the conservative and the Reform? And if you're an atheist and you're Jewish, are you a Jew? And so on and so forth. There's no agreement on what's a Jew. So, by the way, Hitler had a lot of problems with that. He did because he claimed Jews were a race. Well, how do you prove the Jewish race? He had no other way except to prove it by descent from a Jewish, a self-identified Jew, a religious Jew, a descent. But he couldn't prove a Jewish race. So there was all these. It was a very complex system of, if you had three grandparents who were Jewish, and if one was married to a non-Jew, and they were called the mixture, were called the Mishlinga, the mixture of not Jew and non-Jew. He had a problem where obviously it was a fateful problem for those who were being defined as Jewish, but he couldn't define what a Jew was in his terms as a racial group. Because how do you prove a racial group? So Jews haven't been able to define. I don't see any need for terminology like that. If you agree, if you commit a physical crime against somebody, then we're covered for it, assault, murder, even harassment. So if it's a physical act, we have laws that already cover it. If it's a verbal act, what are called hate crimes, but not just a hate crime, which is you target somebody because they're Jewish, you target somebody because they're black. It's a physical targeting. So as I said, it's that aspect of assaults on Jews is already covered by the law. We don't need hate. We don't need hate crime as a specific delineation or subdivision. We just call it an assault, a mugging, a murder. It's already covered, so we don't need it. Now there is the question of verbal hate crimes. In general, I don't think we need it. I kind of think the U.S., I'm not a flag waver, as you know, but I kind of think the way the U.S. works is probably the best way. You want to say it, say it. It's the old sticks and stones may break my bones, but names will never harm me. Now, I recognize I've taught it for 40 years, the issue of free speech. So I recognize the problems with that formulation because names sometimes do harm you. It's called psychological and emotional damage. That was, John Stuart Mill, the great exponent of liberty of speech. He's totally oblivious to that. He will not accept that words can harm. Now, could you say it's because he had a naive understanding of human psychology? It was the 19th century before Facebook, or a naive understanding of one's emotional constitution? I don't think so. I think he understood that once you start going down that route, it's the end of free speech. If you start going down the route of hurt feelings as grounds for curbing speech, then free speech is over. It's dead. Because every form of speech hurts somebody's feelings, for whatever reason. If you're a sibling and your mother says to your brother or sister, "Oh, you look so beautiful today," your feeling could be hurt. Your ego is damaged, So I think he understood that once you allow for the category of emotional hurt, psychological hurt, it ends up with no free speech is over. So I kind of agree that we don't need terms like anti-Semitism or racism. First of all, because I think they're gratuitous. Secondly, because they end up stifling speech. And third of all, because they're just not intellectually illuminating. It's a speech killer. It's a mind number. It doesn't allow for any genuine intellectual exploration. And there, I have to say, I kind of agreed with the Supreme Court. When the Supreme Court had to ask this very simple question, how could you support the right of communists and anarchists to overthrow the government? This is they believed it was a democratically elected government. And so their answer, I was puzzled by that. How could, in my parlance, how could a bourgeois institution allow for speech advocating its overthrow? And that was a conundrum for me. How could that be? That doesn't make any sense. They're allowing for speech which encourages the overthrow of the government. In my view, monopoly capitalist government. How could that be? And then when you read through the reasoning was quite interesting. The reasoning was because even if we disagree with overthrowing our government, there are critiques there of the capitalist system, of policy, and so forth, which might be valuable. There might be something valuable buried in their rhetorical, not flourishes, but their hateful rhetoric. There might be something valuable buried there, which they said truth would miss out on if they were silenced.